strategies to overcome deep-seated, hidden, or unconscious aspects that can reflect in sabotage mechanisms, that can reflect in schisms, that can reflect in avoiding or numbing mechanisms, that can reflect in social anxiety, not really feeling equipped for intimate relationships, shadow, physical symptoms, or continue inner stress. So those are all functions of our psyche that indicate that there is a trauma somewhere. And there's different kind of trauma, and I want to talk about this today. And trauma healing, which is also one of those really, really hot topics right now, as far as research is concerned, as far as developing therapeutic approaches. And I want to share with you the latest findings and also experiences here as energetically sensitives, and how energy work and the connection to our inner spirituality can help to, I don't want to say resolve, but can definitely add new approaches to classical therapies. I want to start off with the typical list for unresolved trauma in us. So the thing with trauma is, the biggest issue with trauma is that the replaying of whatever caused the trauma can lead to re-traumatization. In other words, going into the past and facing whatever has led to us developing those symptoms that I just listed, it can be counterproductive. And we're going to talk about this today, why this requires a different approach. So in the Step 15 workbook, you'll find a page that's called 20 Signs of Unresolved Pain. And if we can just, for a moment, take the word trauma and reframe it as unresolved pain in us. This is pain that is stored in us somehow. And there are signs in a person that can indicate that, based on those markers, that you most likely have some unresolved pain in you. Empath or energetically sensitive or not. Starts off with number one, addictive behaviors and escapism. Any kind of internet, phone, pornography, alcohol, even exercise, dieting, shopping, gambling. So any type of addictive behavior. Number two, an inability to tolerate conflicts, strong avoidance mechanisms. Number three, the inability to tolerate intense feelings, big emotions, like a tendency to not wanting to feel altogether, wanting to numb. An innate belief that we're not good enough, that we're bad, that we're worthless, that we don't deserve whatever it is that we are wanting to acquire. Black and white thinking, sort of a very simplistic, dualistic worldview, where everything is divided into dark and light, good and bad, demons and angels, so to speak. Number six, chronic or repeated suicidal thoughts or feelings, like that, which are just like an extension of non-deserving, like, what am I even here for, and a pessimistic outlook on life. Number seven, disorganized attachment pattern. So what that means is it's a term from psychology that has to do with our relationships. So, either, the appearance or the occurrence of love and hate relationships in our life, or intensely moving relationships, and then sort of intensely dramatic end of relationships, something along those lines. So where this is seems very overwhelming, where all relationships with other people are really, really big challenges for us. Dissociation, that's a mechanism, a coping mechanism where we just sort of check out, any kind of checking out with our body, checking out with our emotions, checking out with, with the present moment, and really not feeling we are in our true self. Eating disorders, number 9. Number 10, excessive self-blame, self-bashing, feeling responsible for everything. Number 11, inappropriate attachments to authority figures, mother figures, father figures, and almost like an idealization of that. Or another way this can, number 11, can appear in our life is through this attraction to narcissistic behaviors, to people who are more or less taking advantage of us, or draining us, and we still seek their approval, we still seek their presence or their closeness. Intense anxiety and panic attacks, number 12. Number 13, intrusive thoughts, dreams, visuals, flashbacks, body sensations that are really overwhelming, distressing nightmares. Number 14, ongoing chronic depression. Number 15, feeling like a victim continually, like throughout your life, sort of, even with the people that you truly love, like say your children, or your partners, when you go a little low, we constantly go into this place. Why always me? Why do I always have to do this? Like having this like really sort of strong sense for getting punished for something. Number 16, repeatedly taking on the rescuer role, the fixer, the compensator, the enabler, the fire putter outer. Number 17, self-harm, self-mutilation, obviously, self-injury, self-destruction, but that can also be, sort of in not so obvious ways, such as, substance addictions or substance abuse, as well as, sabotage patterns that sort of keep diminishing or disrupting our motivation and our positivity. Suicidal actions, of course, number 18. Number 19, this would be sort of a psychological reversal where, all of this unresolved pain, all this unresolved trauma then turns into the perpetrator role, where we become so angry and resentful towards other people based on this dualistic view that we become vengeful, that we seeking retaliation, that we become the aggressor basically in relationships, that we basically release all this by doing it to others. And then number 20, unexplained but intense fears of people, places, and things. For energetically sensitive, number 20 is a bit of a wide range because, with the amount of inner sensations that we have, that can sometimes be very overwhelming just due to their nature, their energetic nature, in the unexplainable or beyond the five sensory perception, can sometimes be a little, hard for us to evaluate whether this is just because we're an empath or an energetically sensitive person, or whether this is because we have unresolved pain. But there is a connection between pain/unresolved trauma in us and perhaps even the development of our energetic sensitivity, and especially the use thereof. So how we then build this into our life and what we do with it, even if you're not entirely aware of how this all came about or what the nature of it is, but that there must be some kind of trauma in you. I want to add one more symptom to it, and that would be an extremely strong critical inner voice. This is not like a new point, it's part of many of these symptoms here, a very strong critical inner voice. Who of you can identify with yourself that you have a really, really strong critical inner voice, like a constant inner dialogue that somehow indicates that there are at least two parts of you battling within? This is a marker for you guys. This is not something that you need to feel bad or guilty about. This is something you need to understand, can be an indication that there is a strong sort of inner conflict, inner schism going on that constantly stresses your system. Okay. And typically, this is associated with unresolved inner pain. So it means that there is something in us that is hidden to our intellectual understanding. We cannot really resolve it in the sense of, okay, here, this is the problem, this is the approach, and let's just tackle this. Why can't we do this? Because it's too complex. And I want to go into the complexity today and show you why this is something that requires more than just one or two approaches. I tend to look at the physical, the emotional, the mental, the social, which is the behavioral, the spiritual and the energetic aspect of problems. This is something that comes from sort of holistic healing and well-being, is to look at the person in their entirety and not just based on their behaviors, or not just based on their physical symptoms, or not just based on how they express themselves. And we can discover very interesting aspects here in regards to unresolved inner pain. This is often a bit of a trap to think that just because you, like, say, intellectually understanding something, that you got it. When it comes to unresolved pain, when it comes to the hidden inner conflicts and what actually rules us, the intellectual understanding is just a tiny, tiny little part of the healing process. And it's a good part, and it helps us to grow into our self-mastery, but it is not a guarantee. One of the places here maybe where we can agree is that the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. You just need to keep an eye on this resent and vengeance aspect that can come in with having or feeling victimized, and sort of seeing it sort of from a very cynical point of view, like, oh yeah, life is hard, where it's like just reconfirming the powerlessness in that. So powerlessness can sometimes come in humorous forms, so can vengeance. We have to be careful there. Okay, so it's important that we use our humor in a sense of self-compassion and self-forgiveness, and to really see that it's okay. It's okay. Yes, for me personally, subjectively, this is really, really intense. But then when I zoom out, and that is kind of like the whole idea here of all these energy work modalities that we teach, to help you to zoom out and see the larger context. And in the larger context, you'll realize, hey man, I'm not even the only one. I mean, everybody's got something like that. And that can then help to get to a place of seeing, okay, if I latch on to this, take in myself, my pain, my personal circumstances too seriously, then that's actually something that disconnects me. There's almost an uncomfortable void when you start, allowing the pain, when you go there. And because you're so used to it, it's almost like you take this on as your reality, layers upon layers become aware to you on this healing journey. And this brings up an important point, and that is how this inner conflict, this unresolved pain that we have, wherever that originated, how this can mess with our perception of ourselves, our perception of a situation, a perception of our relationships, a perception of the world in itself. And there are so many layers involved in that, that it becomes almost like overwhelming to think that, well, okay, when we first realize that there may be something, we are often not aware how deep this goes. But when we start working on it, we become aware of that. It's in the nature of our physiology, and not just our physical physiology, but also the physiology of our psyche, the physiology of our perception, in the sense that it weaves literally through every aspect of our lives. And so when it comes to self-healing, it's really important to understand that we are not just looking at, like, say, one particular event in our life. We're not looking at, like in the case of the war veteran who has experienced something sort of visually or physically, emotionally terrifying, terror, that now upon returning back home has a hard time processing that. That's easy because it can be isolated to a certain event, and then this event has led to the post-traumatic stress syndrome as PTSD. For most of us here, though, when we start working with our perception and our ego and the way this is all layered in us, we begin to understand that it's really, really complex, and that trauma, can really is mostly expressing in this inner fragmentation that we have. It's like not feeling whole, not feeling that we have full access to our highest potential. And so we set out here on this journey to access our higher potential, to bring this into expression, to feel more free, to be ourselves, to embody our true self, and to see this whole entire life's journey here as something positive. And we understand that there's a lot of integration work that is needed, but we're not really entirely sure what this all entails. So, as an energy worker, to approach this process from the perspective of the true self is something that has not really yet found its way into classical therapy. The initial reason why we are on this journey, and this is something that we need to remind ourselves continually, is to thrive, is to reconnect with our true self, with our true potential, whatever you want to call this, but with the true in us that has the innate power to outvibrate the ego. Okay, the ego was just sort of a necessity, like a crutch that we needed to not die in whatever way, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Okay, whether or not that crutch worked well, aside, to get to this place where we can feel this inner prompting that there's more, there's got to be more. Okay, and that's the point of out vibrating, just surviving our own ego, and becoming more of a thriver and seeing the positive in that, reframing our pain, reframing our journey, seeing the function that pain has, and how just enormity of your pain has forced you to look at your pain, has forced you to grow beyond it. Okay, so here we see that if we increase our perspective on ego and the pain mechanisms, the trauma that is underneath the existence of the ego, how this is actually something that propels us. This is why we want to grow. So for you to get to this place where you actually recognize that your pain is an instrumental part of your journey, part of this multifaceted self, and the healing approach then is to understand that the whole of us, the whole us, okay, the holy us, the true self in us, is composed of all these different aspects of us, including our pain. including our false self, including our ego, including our critical inner voice. Those are all things that have shaped us. Those are all things that were needed learning experiences. And that's the place of witnessing, and that then leads to the place of transcendence, where we can not only thrive with this, not only grow beyond our inner limitations, but perhaps even go a step farther and become an inspirer. So this journey, guys, here from victim to survivor, thriver to inspirer, this is basically, in a nutshell, what self-healing is all about.